role of the public in decisions about peace and war, the role of the public in decisions about the main lines of public policy in general. And it also suggests the irrelevance of electoral politics to major decisions of national policy. Unfortunately, you can't vote the rascals out because you never voted them in the first place. The corporate executives and the corporation lawyers and so on who overwhelmingly staff the executive, assisted increasingly by a university-based Mandarin class, these people remain in power no matter whom you elect. And furthermore, it's interesting to note that this ruling elite is pretty clear about its social role. As an example, take Robert McNamara, who's a person widely praised in liberal circles for his humanity, his technical brilliance, and his campaign to control the military. His views of social organization, I think, are quite illuminating. He says vital decision-making in policy matters as well as business must remain at the top. That is partly, though not completely, what the top is for. And he goes on to suggest that this is apparently a divine imperative. I quote, "God is clearly democratic. He distributes brain power universally. But he quite justifiably expects us to do something efficient and constructive with that priceless gift. That's what management is all about. Management is in the end the most creative of all the arts, for its medium is human talent itself. The real threat to democracy comes from undermanagement. The undermanagement of a society is not the respect of liberty. It is simply to let some force other than reason shape reality. If it is not reason that rules man, then man falls short of his potential." End of quote. So reason, then, is to be identified as the centralization of decision-making at the top in the hands of management. Popular involvement in decision-making is a threat to liberty, a violation of reason. Reason is embodied in autocratic, tightly managed institutions. Strengthening these institutions within which man can function most efficiently is, in his words, the great human adventure of our time. Now, all of this has a faintly familiar ring to it, and I think it is the authentic role of the authentic voice of the technical intelligentsia, the liberal intelligentsia, the technocratic corporate elite in a modern society. There is a parallel process of centralization in economic life. There's a recent FTC report which notes that the 200 largest manufacturing corporations now control about 2/3 of all manufacturing assets. At the beginning of World War II, the same amount of power was spread over 1,000 corporations. I quote the report. It says, "A small industrial elite of huge conglomerate companies is gobbling up American business and largely destroying competitive free enterprise. Furthermore," it says, "these 200 corporations are partially linked with each other and with other corporations in ways that may prevent or discourage independent behavior in market decisions." What is novel about such observations is only their source, the FTC. They are familiar to the point of cliché among left-liberal commentators on American society. The centralization of power also has an international dimension. It's been pointed out that on the basis, I'm quoting from Foreign Affairs, that on the basis of the gross value of their output, U.S. enterprises abroad in the aggregate comprise the third largest country in the world, with a gross product greater than that of any country except the United States and the Soviet Union. American firms control over half the automobile industry in England, almost 40% of petroleum in Germany, over 40% of the telegraphic, telephone, and electronic and business equipment in France, 75% of the computers. Within a decade, given present trends, more than half of the British exports will be from American-owned companies. And furthermore, these are highly concentrated investments. 40% of direct investment in Germany, France, and Britain is by 3 firms, American firms. George Ball has explained that the project of constructing an integrated world economy dominated by American capital, an empire in other words, is no idealistic pipe dream, but a hard-headed prediction. It's a role, he says, into which we are being pushed by the imperatives of our own economy, the major instrument being the multinational corporation, which George Ball describes as follows. In its modern form, the multinational corporation, or one with worldwide operations and markets, is a distinctly American development. Through such corporations, it has become possible for the first time to use the world's resources with maximum efficiency. But there must be greater unification of the world economy to give full play to the benefits of multinational corporations. These multinational corporations are the beneficiary of the mobilization of resources by the federal government, and its worldwide operations and markets are backed ultimately by American military force. now based in dozens of countries. It's not difficult to guess who will reap the benefits from the integrated world economy, which is the domain of operation of these American-based international economic institutions. Well, at this stage in the discussion, one has to mention the specter of communism. What is the threat of communism to this system? For a clear and cogent answer, one can turn to an extensive study of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, the National Planning Association, called The Political Economy of American Foreign Policy, a very important book, which was compiled by a representative segment of the tiny elite that largely sets public policy, whoever is technically in office. In effect, it's as close as you can come to a manifesto of the American ruling class. Here they define the primary threat of communism as, I quote, the economic transformation of the communist powers in ways which reduce their willingness or ability to complement the industrial economies of the West. That is the primary threat of communism. Communism, in short, reduces the willingness and ability of underdeveloped countries to function in the world capitalist economy in the manner of, for example, the Philippines, which has developed a colonial economy of a classic type after 75 years of American tutelage and domination. It's this doctrine which explains why the British economist Joan Robinson describes the American crusade against communism as a crusade against development. The Cold War ideology and the international communist conspiracy function in an important way as essentially a propaganda device to mobilize support at a particular historical moment for this long-time imperial enterprise. In fact, I believe that this is probably the main function of the Cold War. It serves as a useful device for the managers of American society and their counterparts in the Soviet Union to control their own populations and their own respective imperial systems. I think that the persistence of the Cold War can be in part explained by its utility for the managers of the two great world systems. Well, there's one final element that has to be added to this picture, namely the ongoing militarization of American society. How does this enter in? To see, I think one has to look back at World War II and to recall that prior to World War II, of course, we were deep in the Depression. World War II taught an important economic lesson. It taught the lesson that government-induced production in a carefully controlled economy, centrally controlled, could overcome the effects of a depression. I think this is what Charles E. Wilson had in mind in 1944 when he proposed that we have a permanent war economy in the post-war world. Of course, the trouble is that in a capitalist economy, there are only a number of ways in which government intervention can take place. It can't be competitive with the private empires, for example, which is to say that it can't be any useful production. In fact, it has to be the production of luxury goods, not capital, not useful commodities, which would be competitive. And unfortunately, there's only one category of luxury goods that can be produced endlessly with rapid obsolescence, quickly wasting, and no limit on how many of them you can use. We all know what that is. This whole matter is described pretty well by the business historian Alfred Chandler. He describes the economic lessons of World War II as follows. The government spent far more than the most enthusiastic New Dealer had ever proposed. Most of the output of the expenditures was destroyed or left on the battlefields of Europe and Asia. But the resulting increased demand sent the nation into a period of prosperity, the like of which had never before been seen. Moreover, the supplying of huge armies and navies fighting the most massive war of all time required a tight centralized control of the national economy. This effort brought corporate managers to Washington to carry out one of the most complex pieces of economic planning in history. That experience lessened the ideological fears over the government's role in stabilizing the economy. This is a conservative commentator, I might point out. It may be added that the ensuing Cold War carried further the depoliticization of American society and created the kind of psychological environment in which the government is able to intervene, in part through fiscal policies, in part through public work and public services, but very largely, of course, through defense spending. In this way, to use Alfred Chandler's words, the government acts as a coordinator of last resort when managers are unable to maintain a high level of aggregate demand. As another conservative business historian, Joseph Monson, writes, enlightened corporate managers, far from fearing government intervention in the economy, view the new economics as a technique for increasing corporate viability. Of course, the most cynical use of these ideas is by the managers of the publicly subsidized war industries. There was a remarkable series in the Washington Post about this about a year ago by Bernard Nossiter. For example, he quoted Samuel Downer financial vice president of LTV Aerospace, one of the big new conglomerates, who explained why the post-war world must be bolstered